We begin the day with a widening war against Iran if U.S. President Trump gets his way. 3 weeks into the conflict, Trump is calling on other countries to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It's a waterway used every day to move 20% of oil sold on the global market. Reopening the strait would mean pushing back the Iranian military and repelling any attacks. It would mean getting involved in the war. Well, Trump wrote over the weekend on Truth Social, hopefully China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and others that are affected by this artificial constraint will send ships to the area so that the Hormuz Strait will no longer be a threat by a nation that has been totally decapitated. Well, Trump has called on NATO to join and has warned that the alliance will face a very bad future if it refuses. Today, the German government offered a clear no, saying that this is not NATO's war. Here's the German Defense Minister, Boris Pistorius.
We did not start this war. We all share the goal of bringing this regime to an end. The question of how this will be achieved is a matter of debate. The Americans, together with the Israelis, have chosen their path. We have only offered very moderate criticism. What does Donald Trump expect? A handful of European frigates will accomplish, in the Strait of Hormuz, that which the powerful American Navy cannot achieve on its own? That's the question I'm asking myself.
All right, a clear no. Compare that clarity to the confusion surrounding what Trump actually wants from America's allies in this conflict.
The president just told the UK a few days ago that he doesn't need their ships, and now he says he does?
The president spoke on that last night. He said that he wished the UK had stepped up sooner and quicker, but he continues to speak with our allies in Europe and is calling on them to do more, just as he did when he called on them to step up with respect to their defense spending in NATO. He's calling them to do more here, and I think you'll see that come to fruition.
All right, well, oil prices, they have surged past $100 per barrel since the war began last month. Fears of a deeper energy shock are spreading. And joining me now is Henning Gloystein. He's a managing director for energy, industry, and resources at Eurasia Group. That is one of the world's leading geopolitical risk consultancies. Henning, it's good to have you with us. I'd like to start tonight with you by listening to the U.S. President, Donald Trump, and his call on other countries to get involved. Now, this is what he said earlier today. Take a listen.
Numerous countries have told me they're on the way. Some are very enthusiastic about it, and some aren't. Some are countries that we've helped for many, many years. We've protected them from horrible outside sources, and they weren't that enthusiastic. And the level of enthusiasm matters to me.
So, Henning, I mean, officially there are still no takers here. What does this tell you then about how allies are interpreting the U.S. call for help?
Yeah, thank you. So the issue here is that very few countries, apart from the United States and Israel, wants to be involved in the active fighting against Iran. As we heard, the German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, he was talking earlier. He was unwilling. He was saying that the United States started this war, and this is not a war that Germany or the Europeans want to get involved in. So what, however, is the case is that some European navies and also international navies, potentially India, have said that they might be willing to be involved in a purely passive effort to protect the freedom of navigation of shipping. But that would require de-escalation in the Gulf area, and that is just not the case yet.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Trump was warned that the Iranians could shut down the Strait of Hormuz, but that Trump believed Iran would most likely capitulate before taking such a step. He even told his advisors that Tehran, that even if Tehran attempted to block the strait, that the U.S. military would be able to handle the threat. What do you think this tells us? I mean, is this an example of executive hubris? Or is it an example of the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the State Department being completely impotent when it comes to influencing this president?
I think there were a couple of false assumptions prior to the start of this war. One of them was that the retaliation we've seen by Iran has been much stronger than most anticipated, including probably the United States government, but also many analysts, including ourselves. We did not expect Iran to retaliate in the way that they would target energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure in the Gulf countries, especially of the United Arab Emirates. And we did not fully expect them to fully target shipping and energy infrastructure in the region. They have done that. They've done that with minimum effort, it has to be said. The Strait of Hormuz is not officially actually closed. It's just Iran threatening attacks on tankers, and they have conducted a few attacks, but they haven't attacked every ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz. So we'll have to wait and see whether the United States and other navies can force it open. But at this stage, it's mostly the retaliatory function of Iran that has probably surprised the most.
Well, Henny, how did this catch you off guard? I mean, as an outsider, it seems that would be Iran's biggest leverage, right? Is to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, or to attack a couple of ships going through and then spook the entire global economy.
Yeah, you're right. But in the past, Iran has retaliated in very measured ways. We have to keep in mind the United States and Israel have attacked Iran several times over the last couple of years, and Iran's retaliation has been very limited. Must also be said that U.S. and Israel's actions against Iran were much more limited than they are now. So it's probably the intensity of the fighting and the intensity of the attack that forced Iran's function here. Probably it's worth saying, though, that Iran is certainly not retaliating at maximum effort now. There are hundreds of tankers sitting fully laden with oil, gas, and chemicals in the Gulf region, and they could all be targeted, and that has not been the case yet.
That's a very, very good point to make. What happens, though, if this strait remains closed? I mean, oil has already surged past $100 a barrel. We've heard some analysts warning that prices could soar past $200 if the blockage persists. I mean, how close are we to that scenario?
$200 would require quite a lot of escalation and deterioration of supply. However, there is a risk. If this scenario happens that Iran attacks to the maximum of its capabilities, tries to attack the remaining oil and gas that comes out of the Gulf. For instance, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are pumping oil through pipelines to alternative ports. They are within range of Iran's missiles and drones. So if that gets attacked and the Strait of Hormuz remains shut, let's say throughout April, we could see much higher prices. The destruction that we would require to see on the demand side would probably then be equivalent to what we saw during COVID. And I mean, we all remember what that required.
The International Energy Agency is calling this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Quite a statement. Is that accurate in your view? And what does that reveal about the fragility of the energy system today? And I have to ask you, who are the customers? I mean, who is buying the oil that is going nowhere at the moment?
So the biggest exposure to this disruption is in the Indo-Pacific region. About 80% of all the oil and natural gas that comes out of the Gulf flows towards clients and customers in Asia. So Europe has less exposure to this crisis than it did to the one in 2022 when we lost Russian gas imports in Europe. But I would agree with the IEA. This is the biggest disruption of oil and gas the world has ever seen in terms of full volume disruption and in terms of how many customers are affected. And it's worth pointing out it's not just oil, it's also liquefied natural gas, so LNG, that's been disrupted, and chemicals.
Iran's new leadership is vowing to keep the strait closed to enemy nations. I mean, the emphasis there is on enemy. How sustainable is that position for Iran, both economically and militarily, would you say?
Yeah, they're in a precarious position. I mean, the U.S. and Israeli joint attacks and ongoing bombings are severe. We keep hearing figures that 700 targets have been attacked. Some people say even thousands. So it's questionable how long Iran can keep up its resistance function. We hear that their missiles stockpiles have been depleted and that the launch sites have largely been destroyed. However, so far they are still shooting back. And for them, survival is victory. We have to keep that in mind. If the Iranian government in its current form with the Revolutionary Guards stays in power, for them, that is victory. And that is what they're trying to achieve.
So let's assume then that things deteriorate and that there are no takers for this call by the U.S. president to help keep the strait open. What happens then if the U.S. ends up escorting tankers unilaterally through the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, is there anything stabilizing about that option, in your opinion?
Not really, because that would then probably mean that U.S. President Trump goes even more on the social media offensive and TV offensive, castigating countries that aren't helping him, whether that's China or Japan or European allies. And then we would probably see a strong preference of supplies that benefits the United States and its closest allies. So it's not an outcome that is particularly good for the world. But to be fair, I actually also think that once there is a slight de-escalation of the situation, there will be international naval efforts that will be willing to send assets there to ensure freedom of navigation. But we do need that de-escalation first.
Can you name me countries that you think are most likely to come to the aid of the U.S.?
So in Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron has been talking about this quite openly for a few days now, and they have a lot of naval assets in the East Mediterranean that could move over quite fast. Greece, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands have all sent naval assets. Now, Spain, of course, is not on good terms with the United States at the moment, so that's a big question mark. But there are a fair few European nations. India has said it might come to support freedom of navigation, especially if that should help the UAE, which is a strategic ally. And of course, Japan, they have a huge dependency on Gulf oil and gas supply, and so they might be in a position here to help as well.
And I know you work a lot, your business, of course, is risk analysis. An energy analyst told us on this program that it's possible that the U.S. president is trying to move Europe into complete dependency on U.S. oil and liquefied natural gas. I mean, do you think that could really be a result of this war when everything is said and done and the fighting's over?
No, complete dependency on U.S. oil and gas imports is not going to happen for Europe. However, a further increased dependency on U.S. oil and gas imports is possible. The Europeans have actually pledged that themselves last year in return for, or in hopes of, lower tariffs. So, and from the United States point of view, energy dominance, in part through raised oil and gas exports, in particular to allies, is part of U.S. stated policy. So that is part of the policy. However, it's worth keeping in mind from a European point of view purely that this Gulf disruption isn't as bad for Europe as the 2022 disruption was. Only about 10% of the Gulf's oil and gas exports actually end up in Europe. So no, total dependency on the United States will not happen, but a slightly bigger one than we are currently seeing is certainly possible, yes. All
right. Great discussion with you. Henning Loystein, Managing Director for Energy, Industry and Resources at Eurasia Group. Henning, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.